You're in a hand and you look down at pocket aces on a 9 high connected board. In isolation, that hand feels unbeatable. Your villain just called your bet without even thinking about it. Your aces suddenly don't turn to trash because of that one call, but the question you should be asking has changed. It's no longer, do I have an overpair? It's, how does this overpair actually hold up against everything my villain could be continuing with on this exact board? And on a board like this, that continuing range is loaded with straights, two pairs, sets, and monster draws your aces simply weren't built to beat. And that's what we're talking about today, not advantage. The difference between how strong your hand looks sitting in your hand and how strong it actually is once you put it up against what your villain can realistically have. This is Vinton Poker, precision in, profits out. I'm Vinton, and if this is your first time here, I help live cash players stop bleeding money to mistakes they don't even know they're making. My mission with this channel is simple. I want to take you from playing on feel and intuition to playing with precision, because precision is what turns a losing player into a crusher. Today we're talking about nut advantage, one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern poker theory. Most players hear the phrase and they think it just means having a strong hand. It doesn't. Nut advantage is primarily a range level concept. It's about which player's entire range contains a greater concentration of the strongest possible holdings on a given board. Notice what I didn't say. I didn't say your exact hand has to be one of the strongest hands. Nut advantage belongs to your range, not necessarily to the two cards that you're holding. Your job isn't to try to figure out which player usually has the nut advantage. Your job is to recognize when your range can credibly represent the strongest hands and whether the player sitting across from you is actually capable of folding to that story. And once you understand that distinction, a lot of your bet sizing, your bluffing, and your calling decisions start to make a lot more sense. Nut advantage answers one question. Which range contains a greater concentration of the strongest available hands? That's it. It's not asking who has the best hand right now. It's asking whose range is more heavily concentrated around the strongest available hands. Most players get this wrong because they confuse having a strong hand with having the nut advantage. Those are not the same things. Consider this example. An under the gun player raises, the big blind calls, and the board runs out 8, 7, 6, deuce, deuce. Which range contains more of the strongest possible hands? Usually, it's the big blind's range. The nut straight on this board is 10-9. The under the gun raiser can occasionally have 10-9 suited, so the raiser is not locked out of the nuts. But the big blind can often defend both suited and offsuit combinations of 10-9, depending on the raise size and the game. That can give the big blind more combinations of the literal nut straight. The big blind also reaches this board with more low connected hands such as 9-5 suited, 5-4 suited, 8-7, 7-6, and 8-6. Those hands create additional straights, two pairs, and other strong holdings that appear less frequently in a tight under the gun opening range. That does not mean the big blind automatically has the best hand in this particular deal. The under the gun player may still hold pocket aces, a set, or other strong hands. The point is that when the two full ranges are compared, the big blind arrives on this board with a greater concentration of the strongest possible hands. That is nut advantage. It belongs to the range, not necessarily to the two cards either player is holding right now. This matters at the table because nut advantage is one of the main factors determining which range can actually support large, polarized bets with enough real value behind them. When your range contains more of the strong hands, it can support larger, more polarized bets. A competent opponent generally has to defend more cautiously because those large bets are backed by legitimate value combinations. When your line carries too few strong value hands, large bets become structurally harder to support, and a competent villain has an easier time pushing back. That shows up in your sizing, your bluffing frequency, your value betting, your check raising, and especially your river decisions. Now, here's a distinction that separates players who understand theory from those who just repeat buzzwords. Nut advantage and range advantage are not the same thing. Range advantage means one range has greater average equity when the two full ranges are compared. Nut advantage means one range contains greater concentration of the strongest available hands. You can have one without the other. Picture an ace 7 deuce rainbow flop. Turn f5, river f4. On the final board of ace 7 deuce 5 4, 6-3 makes the nuts. A 7 high straight, 3 deuce makes the wheel, a 5 high straight, which is strong but not the nuts. Depending on the position, pre-flop ranges, and previous action, the caller's range may contain more 6-3 combinations than the raiser's, shifting the nut advantage toward the caller even if the raiser still holds many strong one-pair hands. Let's go over that again because that's the one idea that I think is the most critical one to understand. Range advantage and nut advantage are not the same things, and you can hold one without the other. If you remember one sentence from this video, remember that one. If that distinction just cleared up some confusion for you, take a second and hit the like button and subscribe. It lets me know that these videos are landing and helping. Because once you understand the difference between range advantage and nut advantage, the next thing you need to know is that nut advantage isn't fixed. It can change as new cards are dealt. Every turn and every river reshapes the way both ranges interact with the board. Strong players don't assume the answer stays the same. Every new community card forces them to ask the same question again. Which range now contains more of the strongest hands? Here's an example. The cutoff raises and the big blind calls. The flop comes ace of spades, king of diamonds, 6 of spades. On this board, the cutoff usually starts with the nut advantage. The pre-flop raiser has more strong ace-x hands, more ace-kings, and more pocket aces, and many more of the strongest Broadway combinations. Now the turn is 5 of clubs, and the river is 4 of spades. Suddenly the board looks very different. Low connected hands that were only draws on earlier streets now become straights. Suited hands can now become flushes. The board has evolved, and because the board changed, both ranges have changed with it. The important question is not whether one specific hand makes a straight or a flush. The important question is which range picked up more of those powerful hands. In many situations, the big blind reaches this river with more low-connected holdings that can make straights, while the cutoff still remains many of the strongest flush combinations because of its strong suited Broadway holdings. That means the answer isn't automatic. Sometimes the nut advantage stays with the pre-flop raiser, sometimes it shifts towards the caller. Sometimes both players improve in different ways. Every new card changes the calculation. Nut advantage isn't something you determine once on the flop and then forget about it. It's something you reassess on every street because every new card changes the interaction between the two ranges. This is where capped and uncapped ranges come in. An uncapped range retains a meaningful share of the strongest hands. A capped range contains few or none near the top of what's possible. Let me walk one full hand through all 3 streets so you can see how this actually plays out. The cutoff opens and the big blind calls. The flop comes ace of clubs, 7 of diamonds, 2 of spades. The big blind checks. This board strongly favors the cutoff's range. Compared with the big blind, the cutoff arrives here with more strong ace-x combinations, top sets, and a stronger overall distribution of high card hands. Because of that range advantage, A small continuation bet with a high frequency is a common strategy. The cutoff bets one-third pot and the big blind calls. At this point, the big blind's range is still wide. It can contain strong aces, weak aces, pocket pairs, straight draws, backdoor flush draws, and occasionally slow-played monsters. A single call does not automatically cap the range, and it certainly doesn't prove the big blind is weak. The turn is the king of hearts. The big blind checks again. That king improves the cutoff's strongest value region. Ace-king becomes two pair, pocket kings become a set, other king X hands also improve. At the same time, the big blind's range still contains many one-pair hands and draws that continued on the flop. Whether the cutoff should now increase its bet size depends on the interaction between the two ranges. If the turn strengthens the cutoff's value region more than the big blind's continuing range, the cutoff may now support a larger, more polarized betting strategy with selected value hands and carefully chosen bluffs. That does not mean every ace, every king, or every missed draw should suddenly bet large. It means the cutoff's range now has a better structural support for using a larger size. If the river strengthens the cutoff's strongest value hands while the big blind continues with a passive line, the cutoff may have profitable opportunities to use very large bets or even overbets with the appropriate value hands and bluff candidates. The important point is that those larger sizes are supported by how the ranges interact, not simply because another card was dealt. The slogan here isn't small flop, big turn, max river. It's this: bet size grows when ranges actually polarize, not merely because another street was dealt. Once your range becomes polarized, another question naturally follows. Which hands actually belong in those large bets? Your strongest value hands are easy. They clearly want to build bigger pots. The harder question is choosing the right bluffs, and that's where blockers become important. Suppose the river completes a flush and you're holding the ace of that suit. You're blocking the nut flush. That blocker becomes valuable because it removes some of the strongest hands your opponent could continue with. Through card removal, it reduces the number of value combinations available to your opponent's range. But blockers are only one piece of the puzzle. Holding a good blocker doesn't automatically make a bluff profitable. Your opponent still has to fold often enough. That's where the math comes in. The break-even formula for a zero equity bluff is simple. Take your bet and divide it by the pot plus your bet. The result tells you how often your opponent must fold for the bluff to break even. If the pot is $300 and you bet $300, the calculation is 300 divided by 600, or 50%. Exactly 50% is break even. Above 50%, the bluff makes money. Below 50%, it loses money. That's why blockers and math belong together. Blockers may increase the chance your opponent folds. The formula tells you whether they fold often enough for your bluff to actually earn a profit. Let's think about that for a second because it's easy to nod along to it and then still miss it at the table. Nut advantage helps create a credible threat, but the actual fold equity comes from how your specific villain responds to that threat, not from your range alone. Stack depth changes how this plays out too. Deeper stacks increase the leverage that nut advantage creates because multiple future bets can threaten a bigger share of your villain's stack. At a shallow stack to pot ratio, nut advantage still matters, but it expresses itself differently, often collapsing into a simpler bet jam, check jam, or stack off decision rather than a full multi-street plan. If you want a full breakdown of how to combine range and nut advantage into an actual exploitative betting strategy against real opponents, that's covered in Module 5, Pipo Exploitation Mastery of my course, the Delusion Killer Masterclass, where I go deep on merging pipo logic with GTO baselines. I built that section specifically because theory alone doesn't win pots. Theory fed with accurate information about the person sitting across from you does. I've worked with enough struggling players to know what this course can achieve when someone actually studies and applies it. The students inside my program who go through it diligently, those who approach improving their game responsibly and with discipline, those players, those are not the same players they were 3 months earlier. They are substantially better and have a much higher win rate. If you want to see what my program actually looks like and what it can do for your game, talk to me directly. I offer a free one-on-one coaching session where we can look at your own game together. Just click the WhatsApp link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen to grab your free coaching session while spots remain. Let's come back to nut advantage because there is one more layer that matters more than anything else we have covered today. A lot of players hear nut advantage and start forcing big bets and fancy bluffs because simply their range can theoretically contain more nutted combinations. That sounds sophisticated, but at most 1-3 and 2-5 tables, it can turn into another form of fancy play syndrome. A solver may say your range has more straights or sets on a given board, but many live players simply do not respond to that kind of range pressure in a theoretical, disciplined way. That's why I want you to walk away from this video with this one habit. The next time you're in a hand, don't just ask whether your range can apply pressure. Ask how the specific villain is actually likely to respond to that pressure. If the honest answer is that they're not folding enough, let go of that theoretically elegant bluff and take the brutally profitable exploit instead. Against the nit who folds too much, nut advantage becomes a bluffing weapon. Against a player who calls far too widely, use the structural strength of your range to bet your strongest hands aggressively, widen your value thresholds where appropriate, and sharply reduce your bluffs. The board hasn't changed. The correct strategy changed because the human sitting across from you changed. Precision in, profits out. Nut advantage tells you which aggressive options your range can structurally support. Your exact hand, your stack depth, and your read on the actual villain determines whether you should use those options. That's the whole game right there. If you want to keep improving and keep leveling up your game, watch this next video. Keep crushing out there and reach out anytime through WhatsApp if you want to talk through a hand of your own. As always, I'm your friend Vinton. GG.